Deanna Durbin was one of the most famous actresses of the 1930s and 40s, and was celebrated for her amazing singing voice. She had scores of adoring fans from around the world, and more than enough money. However, shortly after giving birth, her husband would say something so shocking to her that her whole life unraveled. Deanna Durbin was born in the winter of 1921 in Winnipeg, Canada, to British parents who named her Edna May Durbin. When Edna was still an infant, they packed up her and her older sister and moved to sunny California. As they were setting into their new lives among the palm trees, they noticed something very odd about their youngest child. She could sing really, really well. To help grow her talents, they enrolled her at a special school called the Ralph Thomas Academy. This turned out to be a very good move, as Ralph Thomas himself noticed her, and he was a man with connections. Producers at MGM Pictures were searching for a young girl with a stunning voice, and they heard about Thomas's favorite pupil. They were making a biopic about a famous opera star and needed someone to play her as a child. Durbin's mature soprano voice stunned the vocal coach at MGM, so he set her up for the next stage. The head of MGM at the time was a man named Louis B. Mayer. He was a frightening and intimidating man who'd seen all kinds of talent and terrified many burgeoning stars. Yet, when he heard Durbin sing, he immediately signed her for a 6-month contract. She'd managed to impress a difficult man, and her career was unrolling like a red carpet in front of her. As it turned out, the film about the opera singer never happened. However, that didn't mean Durbin could go back to being a normal kid. She now had a contract with MGM, and they weren't about to let her take all that money without doing something. The studio wanted to see how much of a draw Durbin really was, so they pitted her against another young girl who could sing. The other girl was none other than future Wizard of Oz star Judy Garland. The plan was to make a short movie featuring both girls and see which one the audiences liked more. The results would be surprising. As it turned out, audiences actually liked Durbin and Garland equally. Despite this, Durbin would end up not continuing with MGM. Allegedly, Mayer viewed the pretty Durbin next to the cute Garland and decided that Durbin was, quote, too womanly for the teen roles that he had in mind. Even though she lost the job with MGM, their rival Universal Studios would scoop her up. This was a risk as Universal Studios was struggling very much at this time. With Universal behind her, Durbin would now be known by stage name Deanna Durbin and would star in the musical comedy 3 Smart Girls. Because of Universal's financial issues, everything was dependent on the success of this film, and the pressure on Deanna to succeed was very high. When 3 Smart Girls came out in 1936, it ended up being a massive success, and even received a nomination for Best Picture at the Academy. The success of the film and Durbin's involvement in it is widely credited with saving Universal Studios from collapse. In 1936, Walt Disney was in the middle of an epic search for an actor to voice Snow White in the company's first big animated feature. Seeing this as a great opportunity, Durbin auditioned for the part. Walt Disney himself rather cruelly rejected her, saying that the 15-year-old Durbin was, quote, too old. But this didn't bother the ambitious young Durbin, and she would brush it off and begin working on her next film with Universal, 100 Men and a Girl, a film about a girl who assembles an orchestra. Although still a teenager at the time, Durbin started acting like one of the producers and suggested they hire the renowned conductor Leopold Stokowski to play the part. Universal listened and Leopold was casted. 100 Men and a Girl was another big success and also won a Best Picture nomination. Not only this, but it attracted some wide-ranging and rather bizarre admirers, from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and even Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Universal would take advantage of Durbin's growing appeal by even creating Deanna Durbin dolls, dresses, and even a series of books where Durbin solved mysteries like Nancy Drew. Universal was now raking it in, and the Deanna Durbin mania continued to grow. So far in her short career, Durbin had only played young girls who didn't yet have a thought about romance. Considering how well she was doing for them just as she was, Universal was reluctant to change her image in any way. The most they did in the movie Mad About Music was allow her what they described as a chaste romance. However, in her next film, called That Certain Age, this was about to change. Before it was even released, a rumor circulated that Durbin's character would elope and even have an on-screen kiss. The fans' response was quick and severe. They flooded Universal Studios with letters protesting their darling Durbin playing a romantic character. The studio knew that their success depended on the fans, so they caved to their demands and rewrote the script, ensuring the romance would be left out. This decision would keep Durbin in a rather childish image, which was rather odd considering she was now nearing 18 years of age. Her next film was a sequel to Three Smart Girls, and it was called Three Smart Girls Grow Up. Once again, any romance for Durbin was written away from her character. In the movie, Durbin's character's sisters struggle with a love triangle, while Durbin was left playing the chaste intermediary.
For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factinate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details.
As she was trying to grow from a child actor into a grown-up one, films like this did not help her image. What also ironically didn't help was how in 1938 she would win an Academy Award. Although a great success, it was a juvenile Academy Award. For her next film, she chose a Cinderella adaptation called First Love, and she would finally get a chance to play a romantic role. The poster even had the phrase "Deanna's in love" scrawled across it. Since this film would be a big first for Durbin, the studio knew that they had to get it right. Producer Joe Pasternak recalled about Durbin that she was one of those personalities which the world not only takes to its bosom, but insists as regarding as its personal property. The studio meticulously choreographed Durbin's next stage of development, stressing over her costume and presentability. They also knew that her love interest would have to be picture perfect, because if he wasn't, Durbin's fans would be very upset. They eventually landed on an unknown actor named Robert Stack. Strangely enough, Universal insisted that Robert change his naturally fair, wavy hair because they said no blonde has ever made it as a leading man. He darkened and straightened his locks. Now that they finally had the man, they had to make sure Durbin's first on-screen kiss would be memorable. The studio promoted this moment immensely, as it was a major selling point. However, when the film was released, the reaction ended up being remarkably subdued. Apparently, the kiss was viewed as very restrained and passionless. Nonetheless, it did finally propel Durbin into cinematic adulthood. Now that she was taking more mature roles, Durbin's next film was called It's a Date. The movie was definitely different from her prior work, as it was about a woman who was romantically involved with the same man as her own mother. In 1941, Deanna Durbin got married to assistant director Von Paul. Her next film was a romantic comedy called It Started with Eve, and it billed Durbin as a new delightful harem-scarum Deanna. The production of this next film would be fraught with issues. The screenwriter for the film even got into a heated argument with the director and stalked off the set with 40 pages left to be written. Additionally, while she was working on the film, Durbin's longtime producer Joe Pasternak, who had been with her on sets for years, announced that he was leaving Universal. Deanna's reaction was heartbreaking. Pasternak later related, "It was the only time in our years together I saw her weep." Durbin begged him to stay, but it was no use. After Pasternak left, Durbin's relationship with Universal went downhill. Her next film, They Lived Alone, also went poorly. So much so that it would never even be released. Although Universal pushed Durbin to make it, she disliked the role and hated that the studio had made zero effort to involve her new husband, Von Paul, in the film's production. In the end, she flatly refused to make the picture. Universal was not pleased with this and would retaliate in kind. Hollywood studios were not used to hearing no, especially not from good girl child stars like Durbin. To punish her, they suspended her from work for an entire year. But when she finally did return, she would do it on her own terms. Durbin would come to a new agreement with Universal, and one that really suited her. She would now have full approval of the songs, stories, and even the directors of her next films. She made sure that even without her favorite producer, Joe Pasternak, she would have full control on set. After patching things up with Durbin, Universal was ready to make easy money with the third installment of the successful Three Smart Girls franchise. However, with Durbin's new agreement, this time would be different. She told Universal to get rid of the two other sisters and have the movie only focus on her. Incredibly, it worked. The movie would now fittingly be called Hers to Hold. It was very romantic, and Durbin was the main star. Despite things going swimmingly in her career, her personal life was in shambles. Only a year after their marriage, Durbin's husband enlisted in the US Navy, sparking rumors that their marriage was not a happy one. To hush things up, Durbin publicly stated that she would, quote, "never dream of divorcing a man serving his country." However, only months later, Durbin filed for divorce. Not only that, but in a statement to the courts, she revealed all, complaining about Paul's late-night partying, the way he ignored her when she needed help, and his constant criticism of her work. Not long after her divorce, Durbin was walking down the aisle once again. This time, she fully mixed business with pleasure. Her new husband was Felix Jackson, who now took over as producer on many of her films. At first, it seemed like a success, with Jackson lining up the film noir Christmas Holiday opposite Gene Kelly for her. However, Durbin had bitten off more than she could chew. Christmas Holiday wasn't Durbin's typical film fare. Although they toned down many of the risque details in the original W. Somerset Maugham novel, it was still a movie about a woman working in a bordello. It proved too much for her. After a lifetime of being stuck in squeaky clean roles, Durbin couldn't seem to get into character. As director Robert Siodmak noted, Durbin flinched when it came to the sultry part. She always wanted to look like nice, wholesome Deanna Durbin pretending to be a night worker. The next movie she would make was another noir called Lady on a Train. Even though this one had a lighter touch, Durbin's fans could not get on board. Apparently, Christmas Holiday was enough of Durbin in dark mode for them, and precious few of them came out to support her. The film was not a hit. In spite of the failures of her most recent films, Just a year later, Durbin gained the title of Hollywood's second highest paid actress, only losing out to Bette Davis. As well, she and Jackson welcomed a baby girl that year. Despite her excelling earnings and their new baby, her husband would now do two very surprising things. In November 1946, he unexpectedly walked away from Universal, where he'd been producing his wife's latest films. Only a few months after this, he walked out of Durbin's life entirely. Incredibly, by way of explanation, Jackson simply told her he, quote, preferred being single, and just like that, Durbin's life changed forever. This was an immense heartbreak for her, and it would take its toll on her career. With children to support and her husband no longer in the picture, Durbin felt she had no choice but to go back to the sweet, innocent mode her fans preferred her in. In 1947 and 1948, she made 4 light musical comedies in a row, which she would later describe as terrible. Shortly after this run of tepid musicals, Universal decided that Durbin owed them a tidy sum in earnings that they had given her as an advance. When Durbin fought them, Universal pushed even harder and eventually insisted that to cover the costs, she would have to make 3 more films with them. In the end, Durbin didn't even end up making those 3 films, under duress or otherwise. That's because Universal, apparently thoroughly fed up with the actress who was once their darling, let her contract expire before she made another reel with them and paid her out. On the bright side, Durbin was finally free to do what she wanted. By now, Durbin was so fed up with Hollywood, she decided to retire well before she'd even turned 30. She escaped to Paris and refused to return. When her old friend Joe Pasternak tried to convince her to act again, she replied bitterly, "I can't run around being a little Miss Fix-It who bursts into song, the highest paid star with the poorest material." In her new life, Durbin struck up an old flame. While living in France, she married Charles Henry David, who had been her director on the poorly received noir Lady on a Train. They lived in a farmhouse outside Paris, raised Durbin's daughter with Jackson, and also had a son together. She would live to the ripe old age of 91, but before she passed, she did take time to comment on her career. In 1983, she gave a rare and frank interview to film historian David Shipman, where she confessed how she resented that she grew up in Hollywood, and how her acquired maturity had to be hidden under a childlike personality. In the same interview, she spoke of Deanna Durbin in the third person, described her as a stage of development in her distant past, and now went by her birth name, Edna. Durbin had walked away from stardom and never looked back. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say and who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.